It was the 970th year of the 41st millennium, and the Imperial Fists, under command of Captain Lysander, were at war against the savage orcs of the Magor Rift in what was to be known as the Crusade of Thunder. During the campaign, the Imperial forces intercepted a disturbing transmission originating from the planet of Drashin. The message was fragmented, but its purpose was clear. A Tyranid infestation had taken hold of the world, and its people were calling for aid. This news was especially alarming, as it placed the rapacious Tyranid threat less than 100 light years from Terra, a mere stone's throw from the heart of the Imperium. Knowing the past events of the First Tyrannic War, which saw the combined might of the Ultramarines defend their homeworld of Macragge against the horror of High Fleet Behemoth, Vladimir Pugh, the chapter master of the Imperial Fists, recalled all available strike forces, including the Crusade of Thunder, and ordered them to make way for the Drashin system. The chapter master was well aware of the devastation the Tyranids had caused to the Ultramarines chapter, and was determined to stamp out the infestation on Drashin before it could spread any further. When Captain Lysander's company arrived at Drashin on the Imperial Fist's battle barge Storm of Wrath, it found a world overrun by a swarming mass of Tyranid bioforms. The severity of the infestation could be seen even from orbit. Millions of dark carapaces moving together like clouds of locusts that had already stripped large areas of landmass bare, leaving nothing but rock and barren wasteland in their path. The crisis on Drashin had begun several weeks earlier, when the remains of an unidentified space hulk appeared from the warp on a direct heading for the planet's surface. The vessel appeared to be devoid of life, as any attempt to establish contact with its crew had been futile as it ploughed through the outer picket fleet of the Adeptus Mechanicus and crashed into Drashin itself. Although the Space Hulk had sustained heavy damage upon entering the planet's thick atmosphere, its sheer size meant that enough of it had survived to wreak havoc on the unsuspecting world below. The immense impact force shook the planet to its core and churned up a cloud of dust so vast that large portions of landmass were entirely shrouded in darkness. Drashin's outer crust was thin and brittle, and the collision had all but obliterated an entire continent, leaving jagged obsidian plates scattered across a rippling ocean of molten rock. Despite the scale of devastation left by the impact, worse was still to come. As the magma began to cool and form a crust of land around the Space Hulk's crash site, thousands of Tyranid lifeforms began spewing from the great rents in its smouldering hull. The swarm had already consumed the Space Hulk's previous crew and had grown many times larger than its original size. As the ravenous Xenos scoured the area, they found little in the way of biomass from the smouldering oceans of molten rock surrounding the impact zone, but the lush jungles further to the west proved a more tempting target. The Imperial defenders on the surface knew that once the creatures made it past the outer jungles, there would be nothing standing between them and Drashin's large cities. Reacting swiftly, the Astra Militarum commanders immediately dispatched the entirety of the Catachan 31st Regiment to form a defensive perimeter on the outskirts of the surrounding jungle. The Catachans were veterans of jungle warfare, but even they were not prepared for the horror that was fast approaching. Under these extreme circumstances, a large-scale orbital bombardment or even exterminatus would have been a viable option. However, the Imperial Fist's relief force was ordered to confront and crush the Xenos threat with minimal harm to the planet's infrastructure. Drashin was home to an ancient archaeological outpost stationed at its northern pole. Whatever the Adeptus Mechanicus had discovered there, it was clear that its survival was of the utmost importance. They could not allow it to accidentally be destroyed, even under such dire circumstances. The reason for this restraint was not disclosed to the Imperial Fists. They only knew that the order had come directly from Terra itself. By the time the first of the Imperial battle barges had arrived in orbit, Drashin's defenders had already been overwhelmed. The determined jungle fighters had slowed the Tyranid advance, but only at the cost of thousands of their own warriors. With the lines of the guard collapsing, the Tyranid swarm began tearing their way through the helpless cities. Millions of Imperial citizens perished, with millions more in mortal peril. It was not long before the ravenous bioforms had penetrated Drashin's largest continent. The polar base of the Adeptus Mechanicus still remained secure, however, through the valiant efforts of the Legio Magna's Titans, supported by a lance of Imperial Knights of House Krast. Chapter Master Vladimir Pugh's task force, which comprised of 4 companies of Imperial Fists, was the first of the reinforcements to reach Drashin. The Imperium had recorded cases of Genestealer infestation aboard Space Hulks since the Blood Angel's Sin of Damnation, almost 400 years ago, but there had been little record of a fully evolved Tyranid swarm aboard such a vessel. Due to the sheer mass of the hostile force, the Chapter Master began to suspect a deeper threat nesting within the carcass of the crashed Space Hulk. He believed a Tyranid Norn Queen to be responsible, as it would explain how the invading swarm had expanded so rapidly, though he could not fathom how such a creature had found itself there in the first place. Seeking to strike directly at the heart of the infestation, Pugh led an assault force of his most veteran warriors to the crash site via a Thunderhawk gunship, while the remaining members of the company made their descent via drop pods at a location far away from the unstable, magma-riddled surroundings. After his departure, nearly half a day had passed, but no communication had been received from the Chapter Master since. Captain Lysander's force aboard the Storm of Wrath arrived at Drashin only 1 day after Pugh's force and made preparations to find and bring aid to their Chapter Master. The strike force began their swift descent aboard Thunderhawk gunships, while Lysander, accompanied by 2 mighty dreadnoughts and a squad of heavily armed Centurions, split off from the main battle group and set a course for the Chapter Master's last known location. In his stead, Captain Lysander relieved command of the tactical squads to one of his most trusted warriors, Sergeant Tor Garadon. The Imperial Fist Thunderhawks ran into heavy resistance as soon as they entered Drashin's upper atmosphere. Hulking winged bioforms littered the skies, spitting acidic venom from their organic weaponry, and forced the pilots into drastic evasive maneuvers. As the descending strike craft neared the surface, they were met by thousands of smaller Tyranid gargoyles. The swarming creatures appeared to pose no real threat to the reinforced adamantium hulls of the Thunderhawk gunships, but their small, fragile bodies began to fly directly into and clog the powerful Thunderhawk engines with biomass. Tor Garadon's Thunderhawk was one of the unfortunate ones. Its tortured engines howled as they spluttered out trails of ichor, and as they started to fail, the craft plummeted from the sky. The crew were saved by the skill and ability of their pilot, who managed to hold the flyer stable while the passengers disembarked into the spore-choked air, just before its thrusters gave out. The Thunderhawk, along with its brave pilot, were lost beneath a sea of burning magma. Garadon's demi-company had only suffered light casualties on its tricky descent, but death still waited to claim them. They had but moments before their Auspex scanners began to glow red with hostile lifeforms. The Tyranids soon became aware of their presence, and the nearest creatures broke off from the main swarm to engage them, leaping over the magma channels with staggering pace. The roar of bolt guns echoed through the vicinity as Garridan issued the order to open fire. His marines made short work of the first wave of gaunts. They were blasted apart before they could make contact, but Garridan knew the volley had only bought them time. The Imperial fists could see the much larger Tyranid organisms approaching from the distance. Sergeant Garridan, drawing upon his experience, knew that his force would quickly become overwhelmed if they stood their ground. In a brief moment of respite, the surrounding spore clouds were parted by a rising thermal current, allowing visibility of the Imperial Fist's 7th and 9th Company banners standing tall on the nearby ridge. Tor Garridan ordered his tactical squads to reposition so the Imperial forces could unite and form a defensive garrison. Hours earlier, Chapter Master Pugh had led the 1st and 5th Companies directly into the towering hull of the crashed Space Hulk, and left the 7th and 9th Companies, led by Captains Jonas and Terrell, to hold the ridge and form a rearguard. The 7th Company chaplain had grimly referred to their defensive position as Bleak Ridge, just moments before being torn apart by an advancing creature. Initially, the combined firepower of the Imperial Fist 7th and 9th Companies had been more than a match for the Tyranids, but with each passing hour, the swarms grew larger in size, their attacks becoming ever more frantic. As the fighting intensified, Captain Terrell became incapacitated after being hit with acidic spray, leaving him blind. He could do little in the way of fighting, but he still took pride in his battle brother's efforts as he bellowed encouragement. Despite his troops being drawn from reserve companies, they fought with the skill and fury to rival that of even 1st Company veterans. Captain Jonas now had command of Bleak Ridge and remained stoic and defiant. Under no circumstance would he surrender ground to the onslaught of the ravenous Xenos. He noticed a large mass of termagants swarming beneath the ridge, and prepared another counter-offensive to clear them out before the larger Tyranid warriors and carnifexes reached his line. The captain drew his power sword and raised it high, but before he could give the order, a volley of bolter shells spewed out of the spore clouds to the west and hammered into the gaunts. The 3rd Company had arrived. Where once 2 Company banners stood proud atop Bleak Ridge, now there were 3. With the combined might of the Imperial Fist forces, the next wave of Tyranids, although larger, fared no better than those that preceded it. The 7th Company battle lines had been heavily depleted, but were now reinforced by Garridan's tactical squads. They held the line, sending roaring salvos of bolter rounds into the advancing Tyranid horde, while the 9th Company Devastator squads focused their las cannons and missile launchers on the monsters beyond. The Tyranid assault was seemingly endless, and now the larger bioforms began to reach the Imperial Fist lines. Huge lumbering Tyrannifexes launched showers of deadly flesh-boring beetles that rattled as they impacted against the defenders' power armour. Spore mines drifted down from the thick air, killing or severely wounding anyone caught in the blast. Captain Terrell and Captain Jonas continued to bellow encouragement to their battle brothers, but the Imperial Fists who fought on the heights now listened for Garridan's calm voice as he directed their firepower with brutal efficiency. As several of the more formidable weapon beasts were cut down by focused lascannon fire, a colossal biotitan known as a Hierophant emerged out of the swirling spores. Upon sighting this approaching doom, Garridan knew that the ridge was lost. He was about to order his troops to withdraw to the Space Hulk crash site when Captain Lysander's Thunderhawk broke through the cloud formations above. Although intact, Lysander's Thunderhawk had only fared marginally better than Garridan's vessel during the hazardous descent, and had sustained a glancing collision with a winged Harridan, which sent the transport spiralling out of control, causing it to overshoot the designated landing site at Bleak Ridge by almost 80 miles. After the pilot had regained control, Lysander ordered the Storm Talon gunships of the battle barge Sword of Pollux to clear the skies, creating a pathway for his Thunderhawk to reach the ridge. The withering hails of fire from the Storm Talon assault cannons swept away any winged creatures that strayed too close. As it approached the ridge, Lysander's Thunderhawk sighted the towering Biotitan striding over the battlefield. The gunship launched a barrage of screaming Hellstrike missiles and opened fire with its mighty Titan-class turbo laser, which blasted great holes in the Hierophant's armoured carapace. The hulking bioform was still standing and gave a thunderous roar as it levelled its biocannons to return fire at the gunship. The Devastator squads on the ground were already in position and sheared off one of the Hierophant's titanic legs with a volley of lascannon fire, causing the beast to stumble off balance. Before it had time to recover, a second shot from the Thunderhawk's turbo laser punched clean through its skull, finally bringing the immense creature down. The Hierophant's death sent a synaptic shockwave rippling through the hive mind, causing the lesser Tyranid creatures to recoil, and buying the Thunderhawk time to touch down on Bleak Ridge. After receiving a status report from Captain Jonas and Sergeant Garridan, Lysander ordered his 2 dreadnoughts to join the defence of the ridge, then led a force of his Centurions directly into the Space Hulk's bowels on a mission to recover their chapter master. The Space Hulk's dark and winding corridors were seemingly endless. Signs of acidic corrosion became increasingly frequent as the Imperial fists ventured deeper into the twisted hull. Communication still remained silent with Chapter Master Pugh and the First Company, though Lysander's sensors and scanning systems detected several suits of Terminator armour further ahead. The captain and his Centurions now had to battle their way forwards, slaying countless Tyranid creatures as they progressed through the Space Hulk's tangled passageways. Gargoyles screeched out of the darkness. Gene Stealers launched ambush attacks, dropping down from ceilings or emerging from crawl spaces. All were pulverized under the crushing impact of Lysander's Fist of Dawn Thunderhammer, or blown apart by the Centurion's heavy bolter shells. After a close-fought battle with a monstrous Trigon, which claimed the lives of 2 Centurions, Lysander's strike force found a working conveyor system which carried them deeper into the vessel. The conveyor came to its end at a passageway coated in pulsating organic matter. The remains of Tyranid carapaces and empty bolter shells left by the First Company littered the hallways, and Lysander could now hear the sounds of battle echoing through the corridors. As Lysander's strike force began carving a path through the swarm ahead, the captain spotted Chapter Master Pugh engaged in a battle with a Hive Tyrant. As the Chapter Master attempted to advance, the Hive Tyrant knocked him down in a spray of blood. But Pugh was not so easily beaten. Rising to his feet, Pugh lunged forward again, the Hand of Judgment Power Fist crackling as energy fields danced around it. The monster's leg collapsed under Pugh's first punch, its torso under the second. As the tyrant died, a fresh brood of Gene Stealers burst forth from their birthing pouches high above the battle, and began to scuttle down the walls. Several of the First Company Terminators stepped forward to protect the Chapter Master, and began to sweep aside packs of gaunts with their crackling thunderhammers, but at the same time they were charged by a rampaging Carnifex. The living battering ram slammed into them with great force, sending two staggering backwards as its monstrous crushing claws sliced through the third's Terminator armor. Pew gathered his strength and punched forwards at the Carnifex, buckling the chitinous plating surrounding its head. As the beast reared back in pain, Lysander's Centurions blasted holes through its torso with heavy fire from their bolter weapons. The Carnifex collapsed, and in its death throes, it lashed out with its mace-shaped tail and knocked the Chaptermaster and his bodyguards down. The descending Genestealers saw this as an opening and lunged at Pew, their rending claws tearing at his ceramite-plated armor. Acting Captain Julian and the First Company veterans frantically surged forward to save their Chaptermaster, but their advance was blocked by more and more Genestealers flooding down from the walls. Just as they were cut off, Captain Julian was dragged into the darkness by an ambushing Trigon's grasping claw, leaving just the Terminators surrounded by the swarm. Pew rose to his feet and lashed out. The Hand of Judgment crackled furiously one last time as the Chaptermaster vanished beneath a tide of claws and teeth, and was torn apart, limb from limb. With a great cry of rage and loss, Lysander forged his way forward through the swarms, driving the Genestealers back from his slain Chaptermaster. The Centurions and the surviving members of the 1st and 5th Companies followed with a renewed strength and fury. The Imperial fists fought tirelessly and reclaimed the bloody ground where Pew's dismembered corpse lay, but they could advance no further. High above the chamber, more birthing pouches split open, disgorging ever more bioforms into the battle. Lysander looked up at the seemingly hopeless situation, but at this moment he caught sight of the very heart of the swarm, the Norn Queen itself. The Imperial fists opened fire on the Norn Queen, but the shots merely glanced off her thick carapace. Only a direct blow from a thunderhammer could have breached her shell, but with the target suspended so high, it was impossible to approach. The situation was far too grim for Lysander's liking. His force was surrounded and outnumbered. Left with little choice, he would have to order a retreat or be overwhelmed. The inherent stubbornness of the Imperial fists and unwillingness to fall back saw them fight on, and amidst the horror of the cavern, the captain stumbled upon another alternative. He noticed a lava channel trickling in from above, and ordered the Centurions to ignore the Tyranids and concentrate their fire on the glowing trail of magma. After several volleys of firepower, the ceiling buckled and cracked, opening up a passageway so the magma could flood down over the Tyranid swarm below. The Norn Queen was immobile, cocooned in place by her own fleshy web. The great creature hissed and shrieked as the searing lava splashed against her carapace and began to melt its way through. The magma began to pool in the centre of the chamber, and the Imperial fists were at last falling back, dragging their fallen with them and retreating to the upper levels. With a terrible crash, a span of the ceiling in the centre of the chamber gave way, dragging the Norn Queen down into the molten lava pool below. She thrashed madly, letting out a final shriek before perishing beneath the surface of the molten rock. The death of the Norn Queen sent out a synaptic shockwave so powerful that it killed every Synapse creature for hundreds of miles, with the shared agony of their broodmother's death overwhelming their psychic minds. On Bleak Ridge, the lesser Tyranid creatures then reverted to their instinctive behaviour and either scurried for cover or lunged themselves forward in a feeding frenzy. Their lack of synaptic coordination made them easy pickings for the Imperial defenders, and within hours, Bleak Ridge was finally clear of Tyranids. In the days that followed, the remainder of the Imperial Fist fleet arrived from the warp, and a thorough cleansing of the world began. Far away, the Tyranids assailing Drashin's remaining cities survived the agony of the Norn Queen's death, but still withdrew, vanishing deep into the jungles and cave networks to threaten the planet for a long time to come. Though it had cost the Imperial Fists greatly, Drashin had been saved. The Imperial Fists, still seeking vengeance for the loss of their chapter master, channeled the full extent of their wrath into purging the surviving Tyranids from Drashin's surface. Through it all, the polar facility of the Adeptus Mechanicus still remained secure, though they had offered little assistance with the reclaiming operations on the surface. Although 3 knights of House Krast did defy their orders to take to the field at the Space Marine's side on several occasions. Pugh's body was eventually recovered and sent back to the Phalanx, and a new chapter master was to be chosen. Some thought Lysander would be the perfect successor after proving his worth many times over. However, when offered by the chapter council, Lysander refused the honour, knowing that he had yet to learn the lessons of his recent past and could not take the mantle of chapter master until he had done so. Instead, Lysander reclaimed the position of captain of the First Company, which was now lacking an officer following acting captain Julian's death at Pugh's side. The chapter council begrudgingly accepted his decision and selected Vorn Hagen, captain of the Fifth Company, as the new chapter master of the Imperial Fists. Sergeant Tor Garridan was given command of the Third Company and elevated to the rank of captain after his heroic defense at Bleak Ridge. During the recovery operations, the Adeptus Mechanicus sent a research team to analyse the wreckage of the crashed Space Hulk to unravel clues as to what had brought the vessel all the way to Drashin in the first place. At first, it was assumed that the Tyranids had merely infested the vessel, but this theory was quickly abandoned after a startling discovery was made. It appeared that the Space Hulk was transporting a captured Tyranid hive ship to an unknown destination. Clearly, the creatures had broken free during transit and slaughtered the Hulk's crew. But just who had captured the Tyranids in the first place, and for what reason, was yet to be discovered. After a few more days, the exploration crew found the remains of a navigator encased in organic tendrils which had consumed the majority of his body. The navigator's cybernetic interfaces revealed that the ship's original course was in fact set for Terra, the heart of the Imperium, and had somehow been diverted towards Drashin en route. It seemed plausible that the navigator had been able to resist the mind-controlling tendrils long enough to throw the vessel from its intended heading. Garridan was sure the defences around the Sol system would have prevented such a disaster as seen on Drashin, but no one could be sure. Had this infested vessel managed to reach its intended destination, there is no telling what horror could have befallen the Imperium.